made this video for my Instagram channel. Make it for you guys too. Quarantine, it's been a tough time for all of us. Pretty rough on our social lives. We've had to go to extreme lengths to make new friends in ways we never have before. So I just come outside here. I want you guys to meet my friend Jim. This is Jim. He's a flower fly in the family Syrphidae. He looks like a yellow jacket, but he's a really, really nice guy. Nothing to be afraid of. So we did a fruit fly video back in December, and I had also at that time taken some clips about houseflies and blue bottle flies, but I decided that I wanted to break the larger feeder fly video up into multiple parts. And so today I'm going to show you just houseflies and blue bottle flies. Might mention soldier flies also, since I already have some footage taken of them. But if you'd like to watch the fruit fly video, how to care for and set up fruit fly cultures, please click the card up there. Houseflies, when I ship them to my customers, I ship them in a 3.75 ounce container like this. I have some holes punched into the lid. You may be able to see there that it says 100 plus houseflies. Now these are housefly pupae. Pupae are that sort of cocoon stage where the larva is metamorphosing into the adult. And the pupae are very handleable. You don't have to worry about anything flying at you because they are in sort of a dormant state. It's just this little sort of maroon colored oblong structure. And some people will just drop those into their pet's cage as pupae like this and let them hatch out. The adult flies will generally emerge sometime between the same day when you put them in, depending on how long they've been on the shelf, or maybe a week at the most generally. And it depends a little bit on the temperature of the cage, and we'll get into more of that in a moment. So like I said, I sell them in groups of 100, and the reason for that is because there is always a chance that a few of them won't hatch. Generally, the majority of them will, but it depends a little bit on how they're cared for both before and after arrival. If you ever have a problem getting them to hatch, shoot me an email. I pretty much always guarantee these things to do what they're supposed to do. I don't really sell houseflies or other feeder insects or even the substrates that I make for the sake of profit. I'm just doing that to support my customers who may not have other options for sourcing these materials, or because, for example, you're purchasing a pet mantis from me, and it makes sense for you to also be able to purchase the feeder insects for it too, so that you're not buying one thing from me and something from somebody else and paying for shipping twice. And so I'm always happy to guarantee live arrival on these housefly pupae and also the blue bottle flies. Every once in a while someone reports that they're having problems with them, and in the past, most of the time, we've been able to troubleshoot it and figure out that something went wrong on the receiving end in terms of that after arrival care for the pupae. This video here I'm making just for this purpose, so that you guys can have all of the information. And I should have made this video a long time ago, but all of the information you need to be able to raise these things and care for them so that you can have a successful hatch rate. And ideally, you're going to see them all hatch out, and you're going to be having more feeders than your pet is hungry for. That's really the best scenario. You don't want, of course, to have fewer feeders than your pet mantis or tarantula spiderling or something like that needs. So we're going to walk you through all the steps for what to do after you receive these. Now, I generally recommend that you move these out of this small cup. If you imagine 100 houseflies hatching out into this little container here, they're quickly going to cause a lot of, through their respiration, moisture to build up on the sides. They're going to be crawling all over each other, and you're going to see something like this. Now, what this is what happens when you take a fresh 32-ounce cup. Like I said, I recommend dumping these into something larger. And so you just drop these pupae in there. They're not fragile, they're not like chicken eggs, you're not going to break them or anything. You can rattle them around a little bit, that's not going to affect their development whatsoever. And I like to give this little bit of paper towel. You can use a larger one if you prefer, like this. And that's probably better depending on how many flies you're hatching out here. But I just give it a little mist or two there. See there, it's starting to saturate. Just kind of fold that up, and I put that in there with them. And part of the reason for that is that not all refrigerators are created equal. We're going to be popping this whole thing into the refrigerator here. That will keep them from hatching. And also, providing a little bit of moisture to them will keep them from desiccating or drying out. The refrigerator, or bringing them out at room temperature like this, they are, over time, maybe going to dry out. Now, not so much at first. When you first get them, they'll be hydrated, they'll be fresh, and they should be hatching out within a few days' time at the most. Now, they will sometimes hatch in shipping, depending on if you live in a very warm location, or if you live in a cold location, that might slow things down a bit. It also is affected, and probably not too many dealers will tell this to you, but depending on how long they've been on my shelf. These are about 10 days old now. I dated them at 4/19. Today is 4/29, April 29th. And so these are about 10 days old. I do have a newer batch of them now at this point. And so I'm going to be selling that newer batch to my customers going forward here, even though more than likely these ones from 4/19, same with these, it says 4/19 on top of there. You can see that these are only 10 days old. The pupae were 10 days old at the point that I received them. And they're just hatching out like crazy here. Now, this is way too many to have in a single cup. I purposely put some pupae, and much more than the 100 you see in this cup, into a container last night, or probably 2 days ago. And the reason for that is because it's mantis feeding day, and I have hundreds of praying mantises, young ones, small ones, that the housefly is an appropriate size feeder for, to feed here in the next day or two. And what we're going to do with this at this point is pop this in the refrigerator, and then I'm going to talk to you about this other cup here for a moment. I don't usually keep them in my food refrigerator over there, but I'm doing this video today in my kitchen. And I have another set of freezers and refrigerators in one of my bug rooms downstairs where we typically keep such things. Fortunately, I don't have a spouse or a significant other in any way, and so I could keep whatever I wanted to in my fridge, and I suppose I do in that sense. So these pupae here, at room temperature, you are going to see them hatch at a normal rate, which, depending on how long ago the larvae, also called maggots, pupated and basically entered this next stage where they are these little cocoon-like structures. I should say that the life cycle of the housefly is the egg, the larva, also called the maggot, sometimes they're called spikes, and then they pupate basically like when a caterpillar, that's analogous to the maggot, pupates, becomes a chrysalis or a cocoon. That's this stage right here, where they are transforming over the process of a couple weeks into the adult form. Later, they emerge from that, cracks, the adult comes crawling out. It's very soft. It's wings at that point, and maybe I can find an example of that in the container here in a moment to show you. The wings are crinkled up. They haven't yet spread out as the insect pumps hemolymph, insect blood, into their wings. So that's part of the point of having this paper towel in here also, so that the adult flies can crawl up that, and then their wings slowly unfurl as they pump the hemolymph into them, and they dry, they harden, And then at that point, once the insect is fully hardened, it then becomes capable of flight. Now, I have those adult flies over there in the refrigerator right now, and they're cooling. My refrigerator isn't necessarily the same temperature as your refrigerator, so it may take more or less time for them to have their flight muscles deactivated. Generally, it's probably about 5 minutes in there, although you can leave the houseflies in there for days on end. And in fact, if you want to stretch the usefulness of your houseflies as adults out, you can keep them in the refrigerator for a couple weeks. Now, you might put in a little bit of sugar water, a sponge soaked with sugar water, or maybe a slice of apple or something like that, just a little something sugary and wet for them to lap up. That will provide them with a little bit of an energy boost. Will probably prolong their lives. If it dries out, you move it in or out, or if it's a sponge, you add a little bit more sugar water solution to it so that they can get a drink in there and a little bit of energy. The pupae here, they probably last 3 to 4 weeks. The longer you wait, the longer you have them, the less likely that they're all going to hatch. They sort of have a hatch rate that sort of falls off as time goes on. And so when you first get them, you can probably expect the majority of them to hatch. But as time goes on, from week to week, you're probably going to see a few less hatch. Now, if you were to take this and just leave it out at room temperature right after you get the cup from me, they're probably all going to hatch right away. And if you instead want to prolong the usability of them, what you can do is maybe keep like 5 of the pupae in this cup that you receive them in, maybe with a little paper towel in it still, maybe with a little single drop of moisture on it. You don't want to create a moldy environment in there. So it's always kind of a game. It's hard to explain to people, but you want to have a good balance between the amount of water, humidity in the container, and the number of air holes, and that depends a little bit on what all is in there too. So once you dump maybe 5 of them in there, you leave these ones out to hatch because maybe you only have 1 mantis or a couple mantises. Let's say you have 5 mantises. You probably don't want to put just 5 pupae in there. You might want to do 10. Even if your mantises are only capable of eating a single fly pupa, or I'm sorry, a single adult fly that hatches from a pupa, put 10 in there for those 5 mantises because you're not 100% sure that they're all going to hatch. And like I said, the more time that goes on since you received them, the lower the hatch rates are probably going to be. Now, with the extra ones that you're not actively hatching out at room temperature, or if you want them to really hatch a little bit faster, you warm them up a little bit above room temperature. You don't want to cook them in a closed up container. You also don't want to dry them out too much for too long. But the rest of them, I recommend putting these in the refrigerator. Now, that will sort of pause development of the metamorphosing flies inside of the pupae. And probably every other day you want to pull these out, leave them out on your counter or hidden in a paper bag if family members don't want to see them, and let them warm up for an hour or 2. And the reason for that is that metamorphosis will continue inside of the pupae. It's on pause when it's in the fridge, depending on the temperature of your refrigerator, but out at room temperature, they are actively going through that change that they need to then hatch out as adult flies. We say eclose, that's emerging as the adult. And so you can basically use the ones in this cup right here, add a few more the next time you need them. Maybe mist this little bit of paper towel in here every once in a while if it's gotten bone dry again. And then, you could probably get about 3 weeks out of these pupae on average in that way. Then, once they've all hatched, or maybe you have some as pupae, some as hatched flies, you can extend the lives of the hatched flies too. And I'm going to pop over here to my refrigerator now. See up here I'm at 38 degrees, and you can see that the flies are no longer going crazy. This gimbal is following me. I have it on facial recognition, the setting for that. And so that's kind of cool. That's a new thing for me. So what I'm going to do is show you now. Now I can tap them down. A lot of them had crawled up to the lid, but their flight muscles are deactivated right now. And I'd normally tap them all down to the bottom at this point, but I want to show you how confident I am that these flies are not now all going to fly away. It's a phobia for some people to imagine having all of these flies flying around. And now I didn't leave them in for too long, so they are starting to warm up a bit here. And I'm very gently going to pop this lid down here. A lot of them are starting to crawl out. And I'm going to catch those ones that are crawling out. Now, one of them here has already done a little bit of a hop fly, I would say. And there it goes. It had warmed up just in that brief amount of time to start flying again. So, they were just chilling in the refrigerator, and if there's only 5 flies in here or something, it's not a big deal. But when 100 or a couple hundred of them are warming up all at the same time, and I didn't push this lid down, so a few are sort of trapped in between the lid and the lip of the container here. But you don't want them all warming up that quickly. So the next trick, the next tip I have for you is to, and by the way, most importantly, before you hear the rest of this tip, set a timer. Set a timer. Another tip, never put all of your eggs, or in this case pupae, in one basket. So you're going to pop them in to the freezer. Pop them in the freezer for maybe 3 minutes. Maybe the first time, because not all freezers are the same temperature either, pop them in your freezer for 2 minutes. Set the timer, and I can't tell you how many times over the years I've heard the timer go off and been so focused on doing something else that I didn't even hear the timer. I've gone downstairs, completely forgot about them. Now, it's possible that 5 minutes could kill your flies in some freezers, but more than likely you've probably got about 10 to 15 minutes for most freezers, I think, to where you're actually going to kill them. So 2 or 3 minutes in the freezer, set the timer. Don't put them all in the freezer. Just put a few of the hatched flies in the freezer. Now, you saw when I pulled these out of the refrigerator a few moments ago that I was able to pull that lid off. You can do the same thing. Just scrape a few into a container like this, and then pop this in the freezer for a couple minutes. And you're probably, through a process of trial and error, going to have to figure out what sort of the sweet spot is for how long it takes in your freezer to deactivate their flight muscles. And what will happen, and I think I'll pop this in my freezer down here, just to show you guys. Pop that in the freezer here for a couple minutes, and I see on my clock over there it says 4:28. So I'm gonna come back there. Hey, my face is over here. Come on. Hello? Face, yes. Okay. Back in action. Where was I? Okay, so I'm going to pull these out of the freezer in a few moments, and what you're going to see is that they are completely immobilized. They won't even be sort of holding on to the lid like the ones in this cup were when we pulled them out of the refrigerator. They're going to be flat on the bottom of the container in most cases, unless one fly has managed to get maybe 1 foot sort of tethered into one of the air holes in the top of the container. But they'll be on their backs and they will look dead, but because so little time has passed, they will be actually in a very just immobile state. And different freezers, like I said, will take different amounts of time. This might be long enough already. What else can I tell you about these for the few moments? Now you see that the paper towel in here has sort of lost its shape. And that will happen over time. You may want to replace that paper towel. Because of the respiration of all of these flies here in the container, that's creating some moisture in the cup, and that's causing the paper towel here to lose its shape and to collapse a little bit. And like I said, this is way more flies than any of you would probably want to be hatching out all at once, unless you happen to be a breeder yourself or to have an insane number of pet bugs that will eat them. We feed these to mantises, we feed these to jumping spiders, lots of other kind of spiders. It's a really nice feeder insect to have, something that is larger than fruit flies, but not as large as bluebottle flies. It's a transition between those two different sized feeders. They're winged, and so certain pet predators like mantises, a much better feeding response is generated from a winged creature than a crawling one. And that's probably because in nature, mantises aren't crawling around on the ground where a lot of other crawling prey might be located. But we found that our jumping spiders prefer these to roaches as well, partially because the jumping spiders themselves are also, they tend to be more arboreal than terrestrial, like other certain kinds of spiders, tarantulas included. Now these do make great feeders too for young tarantulas, and it depends a little bit on how the habitat is set up sometimes as to what kind of feeder works best for your pet predator. We'll pop in here now, and I will show you that these houseflies are now in a very immobile state. I guess because I have the face recognition software running, that you probably need to have these near my face. Now, what's interesting is that they look completely dead. I mean, they are like stereotypically dead, on their backs with their legs up in the air. In a few moments, however, and this is a cold cup, so if I put them back on this cup, it's going to take them a little bit longer to come back to life, as it were. And so we'll just set them up here for a few moments, and you will see it's already starting to happen a little bit. One of them had wiggled its legs a little bit. Now, if I were to put a lamp above this, you would see that they would shortly, they would warm up even faster. Now, this one has started to gain the ability to hold on with its legs again, starting to crawl, as is this one here. The other one is still not moving, but I think that was probably 2 to 3 minutes in there. Now you may find that for your freezer, it takes about 5 minutes. Like I said, you're gonna have to do a little trial and error typically to figure out what works for you. And you know, like I said, the flies, they give you a little leeway. You're not gonna kill them if you have them in there for 10 minutes probably, but you know, don't hold me to that. Start slow, see how it goes. Let's get the other one up here. So there we go. Now, they're gonna warm up here on my fingers a little bit more, and like I said, even though they're capable of moving their legs around right now, their flight muscles are still too cold for them to actually take flight. And so that makes it really easy to work with them. Now, normally I'll have a pair of tweezers, tongs, forceps, whatever you want to call them, and I will grab them, usually by a wing, and then put them in the container with my mantis or whatever I happen to be feeding, and they will come back to life in there. I normally work with them while they're in that immobile state, like when I first took them out of the freezer before they begin to move. And of course, when you're feeding large volumes of mantises with large volumes of flies, when they're immobile, you're just moving as quick as you can. You're wanting to get as much of your work done as you possibly can before they start to wake up again. Because you'll have to put them back in the freezer, and going back and forth between the freezer when you're feeding tons of things, it's pretty time consuming because you have to wait that, 2 or 3 or 5 minutes in between. And then again, set the timer, because if you're anything like me, you have 1,000 things to think about and to feed, and you're so very easily distracted by all the other bugs in the room, typically. So you can see that these guys have not flown away. I'm going to gently flick them here into this container. And one of them, oh, that one got away. Fly away. So that's, oh, almost came back. That's how you feed houseflies. Blue bottle flies are a little bit larger, and we're going to take a look at them next, because I'm just going to do one video about all of these. Next fly I'm going to talk about is the blue bottle fly. They're called blue bottle flies or blowflies because of the shiny blue abdomen. And this is the largest of the species of flies that is commonly available in the hobby. Soldier flies have about the same mass. There are probably 2 species of blue bottle flies that are circulated in the hobby, and you don't buy them as adult flies. You buy them as what's called spikes, or as another word for it is maggots. It's not the most beautiful word. And so if you were to purchase them as spikes, you would probably get maybe a month out of them in this phase, and depending on how you worked it all out, you might be able to get a couple additional weeks out of them at this phase, the pupa phase, and then with the adult flies you would get a couple more weeks. So really, if you were to buy a group of them about this size, you should get about 2 months out of them. And like I said before, one of the tricks is to not put all of your eggs in one basket. So I might divide them into 2 halves, and I'll keep this half at room temperature and this half in the refrigerator. And then while those ones are developing faster, the ones in the refrigerator I'll then pull out maybe a week or 2 later and start the next phase of the life cycle then, so that at room temperature or slightly warmer. And the warmer that you keep them, they will develop more quickly. They will pupate faster at 80 degrees than they will at 70 degrees, for example. But room temperature is generally fine. And by having different sets of them going at different temperatures, you're going to stretch out the amount of time that they are useful to you. Eventually, if you keep them in the refrigerator for too long at any point in development, whether it's the larvae or the pupae or the adults, they are eventually going to die out because they don't tend to live very long in the first place. And we are actually slowing down their life cycle by keeping them cooler. In nature, of course, they will overwinter as pupae or sometimes adults. These are black soldier flies. The scientific name is Hermetia illucens. And they are probably wasp mimics. They look a bit like ichneumons to me, actually. There is a transparent portion in the upper abdomen underneath the wings there. That's one of the defining characteristics of the species. Very popular as composters. There's a whole forum dedicated to it about their wonderful properties, abilities to break down the composted materials that we generate in our homes. A lot of people will set up bins out in their backyard or in their garages where they put all their used produce, and these are then purchased as larvae, and we'll take a look at those. The larvae will then break down the compost into soil that can be used in the yard, nutritious for your garden. So these are the larvae. And there's one down here that is moving here in the lid. Let's see if we can pop it up here a little bit. There we go. You can get a feel for how they move and how quickly they move. Unlike the houseflies and bluebottle flies, the adults of this species don't fly quite as quickly. And so if you lose one, like we saw that one fly away a moment ago, they are not going to get away from you as quickly. I could probably look around the room here and see it on the wall somewhere. And indeed, I will be doing that shortly when I'm done filming. But this larva is moving around, and right now it's near about 6 pupal cases. And you can see that the ends of them are open, and that's because the adult flies have emerged from those pupal cases. These over here are fresher pupae, and this larva is moving around looking for a place to feed some compost. And I'm going to show you real quick how I set up their container when I purchased them as larvae. I have a container like this generally, and this I have a little bit of coconut fiber in the bottom, and I really just feed them nothing but coffee grounds. Generally they're rather large when you purchase them anyway, and I just use some of my leftover coffee grounds, just stir that in there, and because they are composters, they are very happy just to be poured in there, and they will feed on that to help the adult flies when they are emerging from the pupal cases. I put this little bit of egg carton in there, and they will climb up, and then their wings will unfurl and dry properly. Very nutritious as larvae. People will use the larvae as feeders for chickens, often on farms, and pretty much any other small pet that is a predator will be interested in these larvae. I think they're high in calcium, if that's something that's important to your particular pet. I've used the larvae and the adults for feeders for mantises. If I were to run out, which rarely happens because of all the different things I tend to have around here, but if I were to run out of something, I could use the larvae or the adult flies as feeders for my mantises, for example. Now this is a very small specimen, and that's probably because I let the media dry out in the larval rearing container. This other one here is a little bit larger, but still what I would call a medium-sized specimen. That one's going to fly away here in a moment, but that's okay. You can tell by how quickly it was moving that it was going to do that. The adults, they deposit their eggs into the moist soil, and that will probably last for about 3 or 4 days before they hatch. And then the larvae take about 2 weeks to pupate, and then they'll be in the pupa form for a couple weeks and then emerge as adult flies. That's the life cycle, and unlike the other flies that we talked about today, these ones are probably the most useful through the whole life cycle as feeders, both in the larval stages and in the adult stages. But they're not quite as meaty. There isn't as much material in their abdomens. The bluebottle flies have a little bit more, you could say, meat on their non-bones, their exoskeletons, whatever. If you guys have any questions here on YouTube, please put them in the comments down below. With these videos, I just kind of put it all out there. I wing it. I don't really plan too much about what I'm going to say. And so it's likely that I might forget something. And of course, we are a community here, and this is an opportunity for us all to exchange ideas. If you have a better tip for me about how I can do it, I'm always open to that. I will say that this video here doesn't discuss the reproduction of houseflies. I don't personally reproduce my houseflies. That is a whole nother video, and it's kind of one of those micro dirty jobs kind of things. Not something that I personally have any interest in doing. I will tell you one story very quickly about how good it is to be careful with something like this. Now, it would be very easy for me to, in some clumsy fashion, accidentally knock the lid off of this, and then all of the flies go flying away. But when my daughter was very young, she was a baby, and my first marriage with her mother, I had received a ton of pupae like this. This was about 18 years ago now, and I had put them down in my basement and forgotten that I had opened up the container that they arrived in, forgotten that I had received the container of them, and I got a call at work one night, and her mother told me that there was a fly problem in the house. She said there were flies everywhere, and generally when I get them, I get thousands and thousands of pupae. And at first, it was summertime. I just thought, there's a lot of flies. But then as she described the situation a little bit more, it dawned on me that a week or two ago, I had received all of these fly pupae, and that I had opened the box and sort of set it aside down there. And when I got home, she had been catching flies for a few hours, and we spent a few more hours that night chasing flies around in the house with butterfly nets and taking them outdoors because it was just a mess. And one of my few memories of that particular house we've lived in, because it's been so long now, just a sad image burned in my mind forever of my infant daughter sleeping and flies landing on her face. And I just felt really, really bad about that. And learn from my mistakes is the moral of this story. Thank you guys for watching. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know down below.
Hey, if you like me, give me one of those thumbs up, and please subscribe and hit the little bell so you know when I post next. Please share me with your friends on social media. Thank you for watching.